Welcome to DEF CON 3. I'm KT McFarland. The rise of ISIS. President Obama and many of the top advisors have said it was taken by surprise. They had no idea it was coming. Did they? Did they not? Here to talk about it is the Attorney General, former Attorney General Michael Mukasey, a long and storied district court judge and former U.S. Attorney General, an expert on terrorism from the very beginning, from the first Blind Sheikh trial and the first World Trade Center bombings. So do you think, was the administration taken by surprise?
Inconceivable that they were. We're hearing that this was in the president's daily brief for well over a year. And we're also hearing that he read only 40 or half of the briefings. Even if he read only 40% or 50%, it's impossible to characterize it as a surprise.
All right, when you were in the cabinet, in the Bush administration, what was it? How did you guys treat terrorist threats? How did you treat the rise of radical Islam? How were you briefed?
Let me tell you my day.
Okay.
The day began getting in the car and finding an envelope on the back seat that I was expected then to read in the time that it took to get from where I lived to FBI headquarters. This is on a daily basis, daily briefing beginning at 7:30 in the morning. We went from 7:30 until about 8:15 or 8:30 every day with the FBI director, the Deputy Attorney General, who was the Chief Operating Officer of the AG's office, senior members of his staff, my staff, senior people from the FBI, and a briefer from the CIA who would deliver orally various briefings on different issues that were contained in that packet. We would ask questions, have a discussion, and leave. Every Tuesday morning, that meeting would adjourn to the Oval Office at the White House. We called it fondly Terror Tuesdays, at which point we met with the President, the Vice President, Steve Hadley, who was his National Security Advisor, his Chief of Staff, Josh Bolton, the Director of National Intelligence, the Vice President, the Secretary of Homeland Security, and and the head of the National Counterterrorism Center, Mike Leiter, as well as, a briefer from the CIA who would present orally for a half hour or 40 minutes, and there would be a discussion among the participants. That was how national security issues were treated, and that was on a daily and regular basis. That briefing at the White House was obviously a continuation of one that had started earlier because there were people there when we got there. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't count the ad hoc meetings that were held in the Situation Room to deal with particular problems that were attended variously either by the President or the Vice President or both, and by senior military people, by representatives of the Department of State. So this was a constant. It was something that happened at least every day and sometimes multiple times a day. And that was how we viewed terrorism-related issues.
All right, well then let's switch. If the President wasn't getting these briefings or he was getting them and not paying any attention, what does it say about today's threats and where it goes from here? You know, we know now from reports that are coming into the public domain that there are American citizens fighting in Iraq and Syria. They're experienced radical jihadists, and could they come to the United States? How do we prevent that from happening?
Well, if they're carrying U.S. passports, we can monitor their travel. When they use their passports, there are ways of monitoring that. And I'm hoping and believing, based in part on an interview with the FBI director, that there is some signals intelligence that we're getting that indicates who's doing what overseas, in particular which Americans are in fact fighting with these folks overseas. And we can go so far as to lift the passports of those people. There are administrative ways of doing that in the State Department, and we can certainly monitor them and deal with them when they get back.
All right, so they present themselves to passport control at JFK, and we know who they are. We know we're going to detain them. We want to have a lot of questions be answered before we let them go back to wherever they are.
Right. We sit and question them. If they lie about where they've been or what they've done, then they can be prosecuted for making a false statement to a federal official, and we can take it from there.
All right, but then there's the second part of it, which is American citizens who don't go to fight overseas, but who become radicalized. They go on the internet, they connect, they go to a mosque, they then connect, and they're recruited to do sole individual actions, cutting off somebody's head, become a suicide bomber. How do we protect against that guy?
Much more difficult, because the First Amendment, our that permits free speech, that bars government regulation of speech, even bars government regulation of incitement. And so long as you can't show that the incitement is such that it'll produce an immediate result, so long as there's time for reason to intervene, you really can't stop that. What you can do, however, is monitor it and expose it, and ultimately it's the democratic process that's going to have to deal with that.
Now, the British have had a similar problem, in fact, probably worse than our own, where they have preachers who go to mosques and they say it's your duty to go fight and kill and etc.
They also have a much larger, proportionately a much larger Muslim population than we do.
But how do they shut it down?
To a large extent, they don't.
So same problem we have. You have the right to say those things, but what about that connection between yelling, fire in a crowded theater?
It's not fire in a crowded theater, because what that shows is a situation in which people will immediately panic and do something physically violent. That is something you can stop, and that is something you can criminalize. But what you can't criminalize is the kind of speech and hateful incitement that will percolate, that will eventually get to somebody's psyche. That you need to fight with other speech.
Okay, so let's assume there's a mosque in Oklahoma City, and the imam is inciting his people. And then the people go and maybe they become radicalized, maybe they don't. How do you check all of those other people then who are exposed to that hate speech?
Well, I think for one thing, there is nothing wrong with monitoring that and exposing it. They don't want to be exposed. In fact, the mosque that was attended by the fellow who decapitated a woman in a food processing plant
in Oklahoma City.
In Oklahoma City, although they initially refused to be interviewed, they eventually agreed to be interviewed when somebody who had attended their services and their lessons spoke out under cover of anonymity. They were essentially forced to talk publicly, and they were exposed.
Now, we've seen in Oklahoma City, there was a mosque in Oklahoma City, which you've just referred to. The Tsarnaev brothers in Boston, they apparently had connections with a mosque in Boston. How many places around the country is this hate speech being proclaimed?
Lots.
Lots.
And there are institutes that are funded by Saudis. There's an institute at Georgetown that is well funded by if not by Saudis, by people from the Gulf, that are designed to essentially teach that a lot of the concepts that we have come to learn mean violent things in Islam, that they're really very innocuous, and to try to moderate that lesson. And that too is a very dangerous phenomenon.
And then what's the connection between the hate speech, the preaching the hate speech, and then recruiting, radicalizing the people who are listening to them?
Well, the people who make who deliver the sermons, who are in some cases financed from overseas, picked from overseas to become imams in these various places. There are hangers-on who will spot within a congregation somebody who's vulnerable to that kind of message, and then take them by the hand and lead them down the path eventually to radicalization. It used to be thought that we couldn't have the kind of violence that you see overseas. We couldn't have suicide bombers in this country because you need a support mechanism around you to do that. It turns out that probably is not the case.
So what you're saying, you've got to conclude this problem doesn't go away anytime soon. It probably gets worse.
Correct.
Okay, well, that's the Attorney General, Michael Mukasey. Thank you very much. That's it for DEF CON 3.